Look at your bank account on payday. You feel relief, right? But what if that deposit isn't a reward for your hard work? What if it's the receipt for a spiritual transaction you didn't even realize you made?
Yeah, it's a terrifying thought.
Welcome to the debate. Tonight, we explore the darkest betrayal in human history. Not Judas betraying a savior, but you betraying yourself for 30 pieces of silver. We are taking the biblical narrative of Judas Iscariot, the man who betrayed his savior and ultimately couldn't survive the weight of his own guilt, and we are analyzing it as a devastating psychological allegory for the modern workforce.
It is an incredibly dark framework, I'll admit. But, it provides what is arguably the most accurate mirror we have for contemporary economic reality.
Right.
When we strip away the religious context, what remains is this profound examination of what happens when a human being trades something sacred for something material. I'll be representing the sociological perspective today.
And I'll be taking the philosophical stance. And our central disagreement tonight really hinges entirely on how we interpret that transaction. From my perspective, accepting those 30 pieces of silver, what we call the monthly paycheck, is a tragic but absolutely necessary practice to survive the contemporary economic structure. It is not some act of absolute intentional evil. It is just the unavoidable cost of existing in a physical world governed by finite resources.
And I approach this differently. I argue that reducing this dynamic to mere survival severely undersells the psychological damage being done. This is not just a natural trade-off. It is a hostage situation orchestrated by a highly optimized hyper-capitalist system.
A hostage situation?
Absolutely. The suffocating guilt of abandoning our authentic selves for abstract, often meaningless labor that is the true root of modern existential dread. We are systematically dismantling our potential, and the paycheck is, nothing more than a bribe designed to keep us compliant in our own slow erasure.
Let's lay out the foundation of my position first, because I think we must be incredibly precise about how much moral weight we attach to the simple act of working for a living.
Okay.
The source material we are analyzing actually acknowledges the reality of needing to survive. My thesis is that selling out is fundamentally a biological and structural necessity. We are physical beings, right?
Right? We have physical needs.
Exactly. We possess a strictly finite amount of time on this earth, and we require calories, shelter, and security, not just for ourselves but for our dependents. Therefore, trading our time and labor for a salary shouldn't be moralized as a profound spiritual betrayal. It must be understood as the practical, albeit heavy, price of adulthood.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. You are completely flattening the metaphor when you say that.
I'm grounding it in reality. The 30 pieces of silver represent a pragmatic transaction. Is it a compromise of our ideal selves? Yes, but the tragedy here is simply the human condition.
Is it, though?
Well, yeah, we are bound by material needs, and meeting those needs in an unforgiving world requires us to trade our labor. To call that a betrayal of the soul is to demand a utopian existence that has never been historically, biologically, or economically possible.
I have to challenge that framing entirely, because you are ignoring who is being betrayed in this allegory. When we look at the source text, it specifically defines the Christ figure in this metaphor not as an external deity, but as our true inner self.
Okay.
It represents our authentic passions, our innate morality, and our uncorrupted potential. The modern labor market doesn't merely ask us to hunt and gather to meet basic caloric needs. It intentionally funnels us into a structure where we willingly surrender our youth and our deepest drives.
You use the word intentionally as if there's a cabal plotting to steal our passions?
Well, the system is designed for maximum extraction of value, and that extraction requires our undivided focus. This is where the hostage situation becomes apparent. It's a systematic dismantling of the individual's core identity to serve an abstract mechanism of perpetual growth.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective.
The guilt of this self-betrayal is the suffocating weight borne by the modern worker. You call it the price of adulthood. I argue it is a coerced spiritual suicide, and the direct deposit is the hush money we accept to ignore it.
Let's examine this idea of coercion versus survival, because any rigorous argument about human labor must acknowledge that humans have always had to trade their finite life force to live.
Sure.
Whether you are tilling a hostile, unyielding field in the 12th century or clocking into a digital infrastructure today, survival requires expenditure. Treating the modern paycheck as a unique betrayal is like blaming a deep-sea diver for needing an oxygen tank.
An oxygen tank.
Yes, the corporate machine is the ocean we find ourselves in, and the 30 pieces of silver are simply the oxygen we require so we don't drown. You do not weep because the oxygen tank is heavy, you carry it because the alternative is perishing.
Your oxygen tank analogy is compelling on the surface, but it breaks down when we examine the mechanics of what the modern economy actually does to us. It's not just an oxygen tank. It's an oxygen tank that is slowly, methodically replacing your natural lung tissue with plastic.
Oh, wow. Explain the mechanics of that. How does receiving a paycheck fundamentally alter our capacity to function?
Because the structure doesn't just sustain us, it ensures we lose the capacity to sustain ourselves outside of it. The hyper-specialization of modern labor creates a dependency loop.
Right.
You don't learn how to build shelter or grow food. You learn how to optimize a highly specific digital ad algorithm. That hyper-specific skill is useless everywhere except inside the corporate machine.
Well, sure, it's specialized.
So yes, it gives you oxygen today, but it fundamentally alters your biology, your skill set, your mental framing, your dependencies, so that you can never survive without that specific plastic lung again. The environment isn't a natural ocean. It was built and it is maintained by human beings with very specific interests in keeping you dependent.
But your argument implies a malicious design, when what we are really discussing is just the natural evolution of complex societies.
Is it natural?
The fact that the environment was constructed by human beings over centuries of technological advancement doesn't negate the biological imperative of the individual living within it. The necessity of acquiring resources remains identical.
The biological necessity remains, yes, but the psychological toll does not. And that brings us to the nature of the work itself. An oxygen tank just gives you air. But what if getting that air requires you to actively participate in something that contradicts your internal moral compass?
The source text does point to jobs that feel meaningless or ethically compromising.
Let's unpack why they feel meaningless. We have moved from a world of tangible labor to a world of digital abstraction,
which has undeniably raised the global standard of living and increased our life expectancy.
Materially, yes. Psychologically, it has severed the connection between effort and outcome. When labor is segmented into highly abstract tasks like answering emails for 8 hours or shifting cells in a financial spreadsheet, we remove the psychological reward of seeing a finished product.
Yeah.
You never harvest the crop. You never build the house. You just perpetuate a tiny, invisible fraction of a process you don't control. That segmentation leads directly to the profound meaninglessness feeling described in the text.
But your framing of this as an involuntary suppression assumes we are completely passive victims in this exchange.
We turn our backs on who we meant to be when we were young.
You describe a system that extracts our soul against our will. Yet the source material itself uses a very specific, crucial phrase. It says we willingly sell out our youth. Willingly. That implies agency.
Willingly under the threat of losing your health care or your ability to pay rent is the illusion of consent.
It is a calculated, adult compromise. To pretend that we are purely victims of a hostage situation strips us of our intellectual honesty and our agency. Let's look at the actual anatomy of this decision.
Okay.
We recognize early on that pursuing our unadulterated, authentic passions, whether that is writing poetry, philosophizing, or cultivating a community garden, rarely yields the resources required to protect and provide for a family in the modern world.
Right.
Therefore, we make a conscious decision to prioritize material security over self-actualization. Does it hurt? Yes, but self-flagellation over this choice, treating it like a Judas-level betrayal, is overly dramatic and, frankly, a bit self-indulgent. It creates paralyzing guilt over what is essentially the noble act of taking responsibility for one's survival.
Noble? Calling it noble is a rationalization designed to protect the ego from the reality of the compromise. You speak of providing for a family. which is a powerful biological drive, absolutely. But let's look at how the modern system weaponizes that drive through the concept of golden handcuffs.
The idea that increased income creates a lifestyle that becomes too expensive to leave.
Exactly. It's not just about avoiding starvation. The coercion operates on a much more sophisticated psychological level. The system threatens us with a loss of social standing, a loss of comfort, and a loss of identity. We take the job to provide the basics, but then the environment recalibrates our baseline. Suddenly, providing for your family means living in a specific zip code, paying for specific schools, maintaining a specific standard of consumption. The willing choice you refer to is heavily manipulated by an environment that defines success strictly through material accumulation.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. Let's dig into this concept of the authentic life that we supposedly traded away, because I find this to be the weakest pillar of the sociological critique. You are mourning a pristine, uncompromised ideal that I argue never actually existed.
Weak? The text is quite clear that there is a profound loss taking place. It states that no amount of consumer goods can buy back the authentic life we traded away.
Something that can ever truly survive the rigors of reality.
Yes, it can.
You speak of the authentic life as if, absent the modern corporate machine, we would all be living in a state of pure creative bliss. The concept of a perfectly authentic life where we only pursue our deepest passions without ever doing anything tedious or compromising is a modern utopian luxury.
I disagree that it's a myth. I am not suggesting that pre-industrial life was a paradise of leisure, but the distinction lies entirely in the nature of the alienation.
Wait, how so? Exhaustion is exhaustion. Monotony is monotony.
No, there is a profound psychological difference between physical exhaustion and spiritual alienation. Yes, an agrarian farmer worked from dawn to dusk performing monotonous labor, but there was a direct, tangible, unalienated connection between their labor and their survival.
They planted the seed, they ate the crop.
Exactly. There was no deep existential deception in that process. The modern worker, however, is doubly alienated. They are alienated from the product of their labor, as we discussed with digital abstraction, but they are also alienated from their own values.
Right.
They are generating wealth for a diffuse group of shareholders by doing tasks that often contribute absolutely nothing of real value to human flourishing. That is the ethically compromising part. The agrarian farmer was tired, but their spirit was intact because their labor was true. The modern worker is hollow.
And you attribute that hollowness entirely to the realization of this self-betrayal?
I do. And this is where we have to look closely at the mechanics of the buyback the text mentions. If trading our time for silver was truly just a noble sacrifice for survival, as you argue, why is the modern worker so desperately unhappy? Why does the system require rampant consumerism to function?
Well, because human desire is infinite, and markets rise to meet that desire.
No, because consumerism operates as a necessary anesthetic for the pain of the betrayal. Let's look at how the dopamine cycle of modern consumption actually works. You sell 40, 50, 60 hours of your week. You feel the profound void of the authentic life you suppressed.
So you buy things.
To fill that void, the market conveniently sells you a product, a premium streaming service, an expensive car, a luxury vacation. The purchase triggers a dopamine hit that artificially mimics the feeling of actualizing your potential. But because it is entirely external and consumable, the feeling evaporates rapidly.
Which necessitates returning to the mechanism of labor to acquire more silver.
Exactly. It is a closed, self-sustaining loop. The 30 pieces of silver are designed to be an addictive bribe. We use the silver to distract ourselves from the very existential loss we incurred to get the silver in the first place. Judas didn't end his life because he was tired from working hard. He ended it because the fleeting material reward suddenly revealed its complete terrifying worthlessness in the face of the sacred thing he had destroyed. When we sit in gridlocked traffic, commuting to a job that contradicts our internal moral compass, we are experiencing a microdose of that exact crushing agony.
If we follow the logic of this metaphor to its absolute end, we are navigating toward a very dark, unavoidable synthesis.
We are.
If we accept the premise of the source text that the inner self, our uncorrupted potential, is the savior, and the salary is the silver, and the salary is the silver,
Then the logic forces us into a terrifying realization.
that we are all Judas.
Every single one of us participating in this economy.
Yes. Through our rigorous excavation of these concepts, trying to parse out where biological necessity ends and systemic coercion begins, we arrive at the same chilling conclusion supported by the text. Whether you view the paycheck as the noble burden of an adult providing for their family, or as the anesthetic in a grand hostage situation, the physical action remains the same.
Right.
Every Monday morning, we wake up, we look our true passions, our finite time, and our purest morality in the eye, and we kiss them goodbye. We clock in, and we collect the silver.
We orchestrate our own betrayal, week after week, month after month. And the tragedy, the ultimate shared tragedy that both of our perspectives must acknowledge, is the profound emptiness of it all. We take the money, we survive. We might even thrive materially, wrapping ourselves in the comforts of that silver.
But the silver never cures the void.
It never silences the quiet, persistent realization of exactly what we gave up to get it.
It is an immense psychological burden to articulate. We've spent this time breaking down the anatomy of this metaphor, and despite our agreement on the ultimate outcome, the tension between our starting points remains. From my perspective, I maintain that this agonizing transaction remains a structural necessity.
Yes, you see it as inevitable.
We cannot simply opt out of material reality. We cannot unbuild the ocean we swim in. Carrying the weight of that compromise, the grief of the unlived authentic life, is simply the heavy burden of living in the physical world.
And from my perspective, accepting this betrayal as a mere practical necessity only deepens the tragedy. Normalizing it blinds us to the permanent loss of the authentic self. We are participating in a system that relies entirely on our spiritual exhaustion to function. And until we recognize the coercion at play, we will continue to mistake our plastic lungs for real breath.
Yet, where our arguments converge is undeniably powerful. We both recognize the terrifying precision of this allegory. The Christ we betray is our own finite time on earth, the single most precious and irreplaceable resource we possess.
It is.
And the psychological cost of that monthly paycheck, whether we view it as a lifeline or a bribe, is immensely heavy.
Looking at our daily economic reality through this dark philosophical lens doesn't necessarily offer an easy escape hatch. We still have to wake up tomorrow. But it does something vital. It illuminates our own choices. It forces us to confront the reality of the transaction we are making, rather than sleepwalking through it.
It demands that we open our eyes to the true, hidden cost of our survival. The next time you get paid, hold that money in your mind. Weigh it, and ask yourself, was it worth the life you had to kill to get it?